One person who deserves massive appreciation is James Maddison. We mentioned him on the show about 3 weeks ago, and I said that he's an underlier. He's a player that's playing in a team that's not had a very good start to the season, but as an individual, he's doing everything. He's doing absolutely everything. His pass success, his creation, his shooting, his work rate. You can play for a team that's, I mean, Declan Rice did it, didn't he? When he first burst on the scene, West Ham were a bit unfashionable and Declan Rice was a very good player. This can happen. And James Maddison has had a very good season for Leicester. Now what's happening is Leicester's results have improved and Maddison is starting to get the headlines. He's got to go to the World Cup. I think we're in a situation with this World Cup where some of the most informed players in England might not go to the World Cup unless we get injuries. Like you've got Ben White, what a season he's having, can play right back and centre back. You've got Callum Wilson, what a season he's having, probably the best striker in the Premier League at the moment. I mean, obviously Harry Kane's better, but on form. And then you've got James Maddison, he's having a much better season than the Mason Mounts, the Phil Fodens. He is. I'm not saying he's better than them, but he's got to go to the World Cup. He was fantastic again for Leicester here. This is a player that will probably end up at Newcastle, maybe in January, maybe up in the summer. I think he will end up at Newcastle. Maybe an Arsenal comes in, maybe a Chelsea comes in, but he is going to end up at a club that's fighting for the Champions League next season. There's nothing Leicester can do about that. He's done his time at Leicester, and he's well deserving of a move like that. I think it's all eyes on Gareth Southgate, because will he take him? Southgate is very well known for having his favourites. We've seen it at centre-back with people like Mings and Cody and Maguire, when maybe there are better centre-backs out there. We've seen it at right-back. I think Trent has been overlooked for people that he prefers, but maybe people agree with that. But James Maddison's got to go. At some point, I think this World Cup is so unique that it's being played in the middle of a season. It's being played in November. This is not favourites FC. This is not about who you think is the best player, just looking at them on a screen. This is about who's in good form, because basically they're going to go, in 2 weeks' time, the World Cup starts. In 2 weeks, your form's not going to change massively. You're not going to suddenly switch it on. We're in the groove now, and James Maddison's in the groove. I think he's having a fantastic season. I think he's got to go. I think he's absolutely got to go. We're going to take a call from an Everton fan, Gary. He was at the game today, I think, and he wants to talk about James Maddison. How are you doing, Gary?
Hi, Mark. Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Good.
Just, I don't think I've ever rang a talk show before to praise an opposition player after a game, but the guy today, Maddison, absolutely run the show from start to finish. And I can't believe there's a debate on whether he should be in the squad. Yeah. There shouldn't even be a debate that he should be straight into the team, because right now there's no better English midfielder. As I say, he was head and shoulders. Everton were off the pace. A lot of Everton players were off the pace today. We got exactly what we deserved. But that guy run the show from minute 1 to minute 90. And as I say, I'm shocked. I've just seen a masterclass from a midfielder today.
It's interesting, Gary, isn't it? Because I don't know whether you heard what I just said there, that I'm aware that and the same thing can happen at Everton. Everton have not had a great start to the season, but you might have a player in your team that's playing better than a Chelsea player or an Arsenal player. That can happen. And this is what's happened with Maddison at Leicester. They've not had a great start to the season, but he's been really, really good. The problem is, Gary, and I'll ask you this, do you think Southgate will take him? Because, I mean, I like Mason Mount, but that's his guy, isn't it? And form surely really matters when you're going into a World Cup in November. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. And, if you're asking me whether he'll go, the simple answer is I don't know, because it's Gareth Southgate, and he's shown himself to be a lover of certain players, and he sticks by them. The biggest example of that is Maguire, and I know he's a Man U player, but he shouldn't be anywhere near the side, to be honest with you, on current form. If you ask him about players in unfashionable teams at the moment, there's a player who's an 8 out of 10 every week in James Tarkowski for Everton, who should be in the side before a number of the centre-halves who are getting mentioned for England. But as I say, Maddison today, honestly, he was a joy to watch today. He really was. Fantastic.
I appreciate that, Gary. Thanks for calling in. I love that. I absolutely love that, because I do think you get the most sense from rivals sometimes when we're not trying to wind each other up. And I think when you get an Everton fan in who's calling in after a disappointing loss at home to Leicester, saying that James Maddison was fantastic and he needs to go to the World Cup, that's the sort of fan opinion we want. It's brilliant. And James Maddison has been good, but you've got to be a brave manager. I think if you are a Pep Guardiola or a Jurgen Klopp, you put James Maddison in your team next week and you probably bench your Mason Mount or whoever. And that's it's how top managers work, because Mason Mount goes to the bench, James Maddison comes in, Mason Mount thinks, oh, I've got to do more. And that's how top teams work. I don't know that Southgate's the sort of guy. I think Southgate's the sort of guy who sits down and goes, I'm sorry, James, you didn't help us qualify for this tournament. I'll look at you next year when we start qualifying for the World Cup. And then if you are part of that, I might take you to the World Cup. An absolutely ridiculous notion, but probably the sort of thing that will stop the Ben Whites, the James Maddisons and the Tarkowskis or anybody else that you think should be going on form. I don't think Southgate's the sort of guy who goes on form. And like Gary said there, probably a good example of that would be, unfortunately, a Manchester United player in Harry Maguire, who hasn't been that great for a while, but will probably retain his place because he did well in the Euros 18 months ago. Some people would agree with that. I think you've got to go with form. Right, we've got Brendan Rodgers, who is going to discuss about James Maddison, apparently. Let's hear from Brendan Rodgers.
Player of that talent, that ability, that creativity, but not only that, the work that accompanies it. And I think the numbers that sit around James's performances, I think it's pretty clear what he'd bring to any team. You know, I respect that there's other really top players at other clubs, but you have to look at efficiency as well as a coach and a manager. And if you look at efficiency, you're looking at what he creates, what he scores, and how hard he works, and everything puts him right up there with the very, very best players in this league.
How much joy does he give you as a manager, watching it?
Well, I'm fortunate. It's every day. I see the talent every day in training. I see the joy he has for his football. I see how hard he works, and I love working with him. He's a great guy, and he's never had it always smooth with me. At times he's had to be told what he needs to be that top player. But for the last 18 months in particular, he's been performing consistently.
And have you got your fingers crossed for him on the international level?
Well, I think for any player, I think it's they want to give themselves an opportunity, and I think James, the country sees his talent and sees his quality, and I think for an England supporter to have someone there, either starting or at least to come off the bench with that ability, you then think something can happen in the game, and that's what the game's about. The game's about excitement, especially international football is about emotion, and you bring a guy of that talent off the bench, if he's not starting into a game, then that lifts supporters, and make no mistake about it, he can play in that environment. That's what he's made for. He's made for the big stage.
That was Brendan Rodgers there with talkSPORT's Steve Hothersall. Brendan reckons he's made for the big stage, and it's difficult to argue with him. And I think the thing, I mentioned it a minute ago, is that it's not just the goals, the passing, the creativity, it's the work rate. You've got to work when you play for a Leicester or an Everton or a West Ham. You don't have that open checkbook that maybe Manchester United have, Arsenal have, and to a certain extent, they can't spend the money that, Man City's checkbook's massive, isn't it? But what I mean is you've got to work. You can't carry players of talent in a team like Leicester. So the work rate's there as well with Maddison. He's not a luxury player. He knows how to work hard as well. I actually would go as far as to say it'd be a disgrace if he doesn't go to the World Cup. And knowing Southgate, he will probably preside over that disgrace. It's you've got to have a couple of spots in a team when a World Cup's in November that's based on form. You can't do what you would normally do in a summer World Cup or Euros and go, I'm going to go with the players that have got us here. Because what Southgate will probably do is he'll go, I want to pick the players that got me here. And that's fine when it's a summer tournament, because the season ends in late May and you've got 2 or 3 weeks to get a camp together, play a couple of friendlies, get the camaraderie together. You haven't got that. You've got a week. It's unique. It's completely unique. I'm not for this World Cup. I think it's a bad idea. I think it's going to really have a detrimental effect on the Premier League. But bring it back to James Maddison. he's going to go from playing for Leicester next weekend, and the following Monday, a week, 7-9 days, he could be starting for England, and he's bang on it. You've got to go with form because you've got no training camp, you've got no friendlies, you've got no training ground to work on things. You've got to go for form. Sharpness is so important. There will be some teams that take players who are out of form or coming back from injury. They're going to get turned over. The team that goes into the World Cup with players in form and ready to go will make a big impact. And the teams that don't will get turned over in the group stages. Let's wait and see what's happened.